And then let me share my screen and we can start. Oops. And see if I've got the right one. Sure. Right. Just for Yanni, for your benefit,
Also,
where is the this is what the assignment basically has to do, Yanni.
yes,
So you're looking at what is the new vocationalism, and you're discussing it, and here's a couple of questions at the bottom.
yes,
And you're looking at how that impacts or is impacting on TVET.
okay,
So you're using an example of maybe what the white paper is saying and what is actually happening at your college. And what
okay,
we're doing today is we're looking at, now that we've discussed what the impact is, how do the neoliberals think we should be responding to the new vocationalism? Do they think it's good? Do they think it's bad? Do they think it's ugly? And what do they think is the way forward? What is the vehicle to carry the new vocationalism forward? And then compared to that, how do the populists think that what should we be doing at the colleges in terms of the new vocationalism? Do they agree? Do they disagree? Do they agree partly? And how do they think we should be responding? And how do they see the way forward? And then once you've done that, you will then evaluate these different views and say, what is your view on what the neoliberals are saying? Can it work? Won't it work? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? What has been the impact on the colleges? So whilst the new vocationalism says one thing, what is actually happening in the college may not be what is actually what the new vocationalism actually promised, or the education gospel actually promised. Right? So you need to weigh up. You need to say these are the points for, these are the points against, and the important thing is to give a balanced argument, right? So you're saying what is good and what is bad, and then finally you then saying what do you think needs to be done at the colleges. So that broadly is the assignment. So today we're looking at the second part of the argument, the neoliberal view, the populist view, and what do they think is the way forward. There's a video I should actually show you guys, but I'll send you the link. All right. So without further ado, let's look at the second part of the assignment, and let's look at development theory. And this is Frank Youngman's reading. And so I admit, I looked at the reading again after I'd set it a couple of years ago, and the reading it's pretty dense. Now I had kind of grown up with these ideas, so I maybe understood them the first time around. But the very first time I had to read up these ideas, I had to read it with a dictionary in the one hand and the reading in the other, and I had to take notes, and I had to look for what is the main clause, what's the main idea in the sentence, and so the sentences are quite detailed. But you have to look for what is the main ideas, all right? So one of the things that you need to do perhaps is to maybe scan through the document before you go into the detail. Look for what is the main ideas, write little headings in the margins or write little headings on a piece of paper, and read it the old-fashioned way with taking notes with pen and paper. And so just to give you an idea of the things that you should be looking for with each of the 5 development theories, what Youngman will do in his article is, firstly, we'll speak about the social context. Why did development theory come about? So what was neoliberalism? What is the social milieu? Why are people talking about neoliberalism now? Who's talking about neoliberalism? Who's talking about populism? Why are they talking about populism? Where does the theory come from? So many theories have a particular history, and he will begin to look at that history. In particular, lots of the theories will be responding to the original development theory of modernization, right? And neoliberalism in particular, and pop. So neoliberalism is the reply from the right, from people like Thatcher and Reagan and those people, and populism and some of the other theories are replies to modernization from the left, right? So the one is a more rightist theory, the other one is a more leftist theory. So the first thing that you'll look at each of the theories is to look at the social context. Then he's going to look at what are the main ideas of the theory. And then you need to start comparing the theory. So it's a compare and contrast, basically. Then you will look at what are the main strategies that the theories propose for development. So they will say, how do these theories think we should develop South Africa? And then he will look at what the impact is has had on social action. Right? So if you look at the theory, how has neoliberalism affected the way in which we act? Right? How has populism or populist ideas, how have neoliberal ideas, affected the way in which we act? And how have populist ideas affected the way that we act? Right? So neoliberalism is a set of ideas, populism is a set of ideas. What has been the impact of the way that it acts? Then, what are the weaknesses of populism? What are the errors of populism? And what are the weaknesses of neoliberalism? What are the errors of neoliberalism? And then finally, he looks at how each theory, like neoliberalism and populism, how each set of ideas are being used by educational movements. So when you read each of those sections, you will have those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points. And I think I may have sent you my summary of in a Word document. I'll show it to you a bit later of how these things are done. In fact, let me just show you now quickly, just to give an idea of what I'm speaking about. Please feel free to stop me. So I've sent you a table like this where modernization, neoliberalism, populism, independence theory are discussed. And so for each one, it will say what are the contexts, what are the main ideas, what are some of the catchphrases, what are the strategies that they use, what's the impact on education, what are the weaknesses. And it does for each theory. So you can compare the theories across like that, or you can read the theory down like that. Okay. So this is my attempt at a summary. You may summarize the thing very, very differently. But importantly, you need to be using your own words. When you must paraphrase. You don't just cut and paste from Youngman. So you don't understand what it says, you give me a shout. All right. So you've got the one. Is it how much? It's the 2-pager that summarizes all of Youngman in those 2 pages along those particular ideas. Let me see if I can get. Sorry. Let me get back to this. All right. So that's what I'm speaking about. Each of those ideas, each of those theories have those six basic elements for each of the theories, or for five of the theories. Right. But the main idea of Youngman, as we say, we must develop the country. Eh? People speak about if you're developed nations, less developed nations, developing nations. The idea that the country must develop. The main idea that Youngman comes through on is that Youngman is saying that the idea of development, even the idea of development theory, is not neutral or value free. How people think the country should develop is a political question. And so these are actually they're theories to an extent, but they're also their ideas. Right? They're sets of ideas about how the country should develop. And these ideas serve some people's interests better than they serve others. And so that's the key idea if you read Youngman. Other people have different ideas of development. They think that there's one development theory and this is how a country develops. He says no, there's at least five different ways. And what you need to be able to do in the long term as you're moving forward and for this essay, you need to be able to distinguish, is that a populist idea? Does this person come from a populist ideology? Does this person come from a neoliberal ideology? Is it a neoliberal idea or a populist idea? Or one of the other is a dependency theory? And normally there will be a little telltale signs. All right. So what Youngman does is he discusses two sets of ideas. The one is the mainstream development theories, and the other one are revisionist development theories. Or to use Youngman's language, it's capitalist development theories and anti-capitalist development theories, basically. So it's leftist theories and rightist theories. And the theories on the right are modernization and neoliberal. And the theories on the left, which kind of revise that idea, are populism, dependency theory, and political economy. He doesn't discuss political economy so much in this essay, so we're not going to look in this article that we gave you. So we're not going to look at that. We'll look broadly at populism and dependency theory as alternatives to the mainstream. All right. Now, modernization theory is not one of the theories that you are looking at, but it is important because it's the first development theory. It's where the word development almost emerged. And the main idea of modernization theory, its fundamental premise, is that they say it's a single process of social evolution. That all countries follow the same process, and that if we do what the Western countries do, then we will also develop. So we must try to be more like the countries that are rich. So we must do what Singapore did in order for us to develop. We must do what America did, and we need to copy those countries. And it developed at a particular time. I think the modernization theory in particular, I think got its name from Rostow. I used to read him when I was very young. And he said there are certain phases of development that countries all go through. And that's why they speak about backward countries, etc. But what was interesting about him, and Youngman points this out, is that Rostow developed his theory specifically as a, what did he call it? A capitalist manifesto. It was developed as an alternative to the influence of the Soviet Union, for example, during the Cold War. And development theory came about after colonialism. And so suddenly there was a development theory to say, how do we develop these countries? And some people were suspicious about why development theory now. Be that as it may, I think we need to give all these theories a fair shake because they're not necessarily bad theories. There's just disagreement about them. And so what modernization theory was saying is that we need to have, with Keynes and ideas, we need to have a welfare state where the state looks after everybody. And people have like you will remember, people like me, sorry, will remember from way back then. We didn't pay school fees, for example, especially for under apartheid, especially for white people. Then, especially there was a welfare state where people were provided with housing, education, and a whole number of things, so that all the state services were kind of were free-ish, right? Um, they tried to get jobs for everybody. There was a lot of that. Now in South Africa, there wasn't enough money to go around, so it was just for a select group of people. But that was the idea of a welfare state. In Britain, they did things like people went on what they call the dole, where if you're unemployed, then you'd get a kind of a social salary that would support you. And so there was strong involvement from the state, where they said the state needed to help people who couldn't help themselves. That is the basic idea. And they advocated this model for everybody else. They said, be more like Britain. And so the education system was strong and centralized. All the orders came from the top. Right? And they made significant investments, for example, in education. One of the challenges that then arose later on is that because there was more and more education available, there were more and more levels of social demand because people started to say, but we're getting education, and they started to say, but then we want more education. So there were rising levels of expectations. And the expectations exceeded the resources. There weren't enough resources to go around to meet these expectations. And the other problem that had emerged during the time is that there was the growth of the educated unemployed. So people were getting more and more education, but jobs weren't growing at the same time. So that's a challenge that was developing for modernization theory. And so some people in modernization theory said maybe we should have more non-formal education. So we should train people for self-employment, or we should train people for we should have like popular education classes. So there were your night schools because people weren't going to education in some of your welfare states like Denmark. They still have your folk schooling and those kind of stuff. Right. So people weren't going to non-formal education. There weren't enough resources, and in a sense, it wasn't happening as they intended it to happening. Um, and so that is the one criticism, is that actually they weren't able to keep up with the resources, and the neoliberals pick up on that. The other problem that some people said is that it tended to focus on technical issues, and so it turned development into a technical problem and not a political problem. So they focus on planning, finance, teacher training, but it didn't look at the political domination of those people who benefit from inequality. Right? So it tried to be non-political. It said that poverty is something that just exists. I didn't see poverty as being something that is political. And here's where your neoliberals get on board on the one hand. They say that this whole modernization theory, the welfare state, is too expensive. And they were complaining about that. Right? And they try to dismantle the welfare state. That's your neoliberals. And then people like your populists and your dependency theorists are saying that actually certain people are benefiting from unemployment, and you people are trying to make us happy with our oppression. And the populists were saying this idea of top-down development is not working. It's a myth. So there are two sides. On the one hand, the neoliberals are saying this is too expensive, we cannot afford this, all this welfare. On the other hand, you have people coming down from saying that this is not working, that the poor people are on their own. So there are two kinds of oppositions to modernization theory. Are there any comments, questions at this stage? You guys still okay?
Yes, I'm
Uh,
still okay.
yeah, so
Still
far,
okay.
everything that you're explaining is well received from my side. Yes.
Okay. But there's a lot there. But that's development theory. That's modernization theory. That is the main thrust. So from there, we start to get the different ideas. Um, so let me get back into this. So some of the main points you'll see these social democratic views, these ideas of modernization. You'll see them in words like basic needs. We need to meet people's basic needs. Um, they'll speak about poverty alleviation. Um, and then you can go have a look at this stuff and you can see what are the kind of strategies that they are proposing. Right? Mass education would be one of them. Um, a mass welfare state. And then what is the impact? Has it actually worked? So the fact that welfare people are saying this, the fact that these are the ideas, is that when you're looking at it, you need to look at it critically and say, is it actually working, this that these people are saying? Because a theory is right if the theory works, right? And there's some arguments in your in Youngman where they start to say things are happening or not happening. Um, and this is the key point for you in education when it comes to this, is that what they were saying is that countries are undeveloped. South Africa is undeveloped. Zambia is undeveloped because of what is happening inside of those countries. They're saying that the people there lack education, and if we have a skills revolution, then they will be able to break out of poverty. Right? But you, South Africa, you must get your act together. If you get your act together, you will break out of poverty. Right? You just need to do what the things that we did. If you do the same stuff as Britain did, you can break out of your poverty. That's a part, but I'll come back to that. Now, let's first look at neoliberal theory. Now, neoliberal theory came in and they started to critique modernization theory from the right. This is people like Thatcher and Reagan. So Thatcherism came around in the 1980s because with the oil crisis, and the fact that the economy kind of went into a slump, there were no longer enough. There wasn't enough money anymore to run this welfare state. Um, and we had it in South Africa as well. So what they were saying is that, look, the state can't afford it anymore. We need to open education up to the market. Right? And the market is the best way of making sure that we have a productive economy. The state can't run the economy. Um, but what we need to do is we need to develop the economy, and the economy will make sure that everybody's okay. Right? So we must, what do they say? You always say economic development, growth. And so there's an emphasis on economic growth. And they say if there's economic growth, then your country automatically will become better. And the way that they were saying we will get economic growth is that we need to cut government spending. Because governments are wasteful and they're bureaucratic. We must get rid of the bureaucracy. We must let business do its thing. So it's the idea of the free market, what people call laissez-faire um, economics. Allow the markets to work, and the markets will sort things out. And they're saying in the case of education, open up education to the markets. Let the businesses get involved. Get more private education involved, and people will go to the private education, and markets will sort things out. And one of them, they say, but now will poor people get involved? They say, oh, give them vouchers. But let them go to whatever institution they want to go to, rather than letting the state run all the businesses. So, for example, you will see examples of neoliberalism now is that when we were younger, the state built houses. Right? They'll come in and they'll send in a building inspector, etc., and they'll have these massive housing schemes. But that was the government who did it, and they had their own department of housing, etc. The neoliberal ideology, neoliberal idea says, no, no, no. The state can have money, yes, but the state shouldn't do it. They should hire somebody else to do it, and they must open up to the market. Because if you open it up to the market, what the market will do is that this will make sure that certain people are getting money in their pockets, and they will become richer. And if they become richer, they will start to employ people, and you're making business work. So the government shouldn't do things themselves. The government should pay other people to do it, because that will create things in the market, right? So privatize ESCOM, privatize housing, privatize schooling as far as you can, open it up to private enterprises, and as far as you can, dismantle the welfare state and get taxes down, because taxes are stopping the market from working. Taxes are making things expensive for business, and if business is not booming, then the country's economy is suffering. So that's kind of the neoliberal thing. They're saying this whole thing is too expensive. Open it up to the market. Let business do what business does, and the government should open development, for example, to tender. If you want to build houses, tender for the houses. If you want to have education, like through CETAs, don't give it to the colleges. Open it up to private business. Let private businesses get involved. And part of that, by the way, and this is what people are arguing when they kind of coin the term neoliberalism, they're saying that if we want business to develop, education is at a very difficult point, because for business to develop, some of the neoliberals are saying that what we need education to serve the needs of business. So education is a bit of an exception. They were saying that education, we need to develop more education because business is suffering, and without skilled people, we cannot have business growing. Okay, so when you're looking at the neoliberals, remember when you were looking at the modernizations, you're looking at poverty alleviation, you're looking at welfare, you're looking at those kind of stuff. When you see people use words like privatization, deregulation, business-led, economic competitivity, skills development, choice, right? Students should be given a choice. When you see things like that, then you're probably looking at a neoliberal argument, right? And the way that the neoliberals, one of their strategies is they're saying we need to deregulate education, housing, all those things. Because the regulations are just governments getting in the way. We need to deregulate it. We need to let privates in. We saw this, for example, with when they deregulated the transport industry. So when I was young, they had an organization, Patco and Golden Arrow, and those places where the buses drove. Then they said, no, deregulate, we must open this up to business. And so your taxis came in. Right? Those days, the taxis, they didn't even have a steering wheel, etc. They said, but that private business will sort itself out. So privatize this. Privatization, started wrong, sorry. Privatize ESCOM, privatize all these things, because business will sort itself out. The market itself will sort itself out. Government mustn't get involved. Government must be small. Government must be lean and mean. And it must just keep an eye on things to make sure there's quality, but it must deregulate and let business do its thing. And one of the reasons why neoliberalism has been so widespread is that big organizations like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, they started getting involved because remember from during modernization, there was a debt crisis because everybody's trying to modernize their economies. But what had happened is that, especially in the third world, during modernization, they were borrowing money to build the dams and the banks and all those kind of stuff. And there was a debt crisis because they couldn't pay the money back. Two people like the World Bank and the IMF. So now the World Bank and the IMF got to tell them how to run their countries. right? And also nowadays you get international ratings agencies. They will say, no, but your economy is not being run according to the principles of the market. And so they're getting involved, directly involved in education policy in all countries in the world, especially those who owe debt. Right? So, for example, whenever the ANC holds a policy conference, then people will say, no, our credit rating is going down. Right? This is going to affect the rand because Stanley and Poor, I think, and there's another agency, Morgan and something like that. They will then descale your rand, and they will bring your economy down because we're not following good market principles. But they have a lot of influence on the policies that are made in other countries. By the same token, they have an influence on education. In education, two things were happening. The one thing is that there was deregulation. So all the colleges were decentralized and they were given their own governing body. Right? They said, you guys become a little private institution and you must run along business lines. So we're not going to send you information down from the top anymore. The college must become more deregulated and decentralized. You've got your own body. The same thing happens at schools. The school all has school governing bodies, and these are almost operated like a company's board. That's how our schools started to operate. This is how colleges start to operate. And you guys may be aware that you've got a college council, for example, and a management structure. Schools have to market themselves, they have to sell themselves, etc. So the schools run more like a business rather than just getting a block of money from the government like they did under modernization. Right? So there's been a shift. So deregulation and decentralization is the one shift. The other shift is that with a smaller state, the schools have to do cost recovery. So there's deregulation and cost sharing, some people call it, but it's cost recovery. So in other words, schools now, for example, have to raise their own money. Right? So they get amount of money from the college, but it's a cost sharing mechanism. And so one of the things that's happened, what happened early on at the schools is that there's a user pays. So people have to pay school fees. In my day, I paid $950 for my school fees and I got all my books, etc. But now they're saying with the smaller state, no, the students are responsible for getting their books. And the students must pay school fees. And you must have cake sales, and you must sell your services to businesses, and you must put up Coca-Cola boards outside of your school. You have to find ways of making money at the school. So the school becomes a little business that has to raise a certain amount of its money. Right? So deregulation, cost sharing, and the third thing that you will see from them is a belief in private sector training, right? That we need to open up training to the markets. So public TVET colleges are just one player in the education market. Right? There's all the people who's offering private sector training. The SETA gives out money to different people, and you have to compete in the SETA market. You have to compete with all the other private training providers. Okay, and there's a World Bank quote there in page 9 to give an idea of how people in our neoliberal ideas think. And so, in fact, what they did is they tried to put education out to tender. They said, okay, the government has got this money to do education, but it doesn't have to give it to its own institutions. It can give it out to whoever it wants to, whoever can get the job done. They can give it to public institutions and private institutions. And what you will have at the colleges is people are doing a bit of both. So I think that the figure now, if memory serves correctly, about 80% of your funding comes from 80% of your funding comes from the government, but the other 20% the college has to find for itself, right? Either through fees, or you can get bursaries from CETAs, etc. But there are different ways in which the colleges are funded. So some people are like Nzimandi he's a communist actually. So he will say no, but the state needs to make sure that the state apparatus remains intact. Because if the private people make enough money, they may decide to go somewhere else, and then all the students are left stranded. So he wants to keep in place a strong state system. And so even in the big countries where neoliberalism is a dominant ideology, where it's the main idea going around, people are still trying to keep some of their state institutions intact. So with all our state-owned enterprises, they've opened it up like ESCOM to private tender, so people can start getting involved, but they're very hesitant to say, let's just give ESCOM over because to a private company. We have given some things over almost completely, like eScore, the people who developed the steel. We've sold that off to, I think it's an Indian company, Oslo Motel. And we may have sold off another Denel, the defense industry. That's more or less, I think it's more or less private. Right? But that's neoliberalism. That's how neoliberalism works. That's a set of ideas that neoliberalism has. And what you need to do in your essay is you need to then say, to what extent are the neoliberal ideas happening at our college? Right? To what extent does that ideology drive what we do in college and how we think development will happen? And you'll have to ask yourself critically the question, does neoliberalism work? And oftentimes what development theory is about is, does it benefit the poor? Is this the best way? Is cost recovery the best way for us to be able to get services out to the poor? And there is an argument to be made for it. They're saying that, look, if it wasn't for cost recovery, we wouldn't have enough money to develop the services that we have. Right? So people need to put some money into it. People need to pay and what have you. That's a neoliberal idea. We need more privatization, more deregulation, that kind of thing. So that's the theories of the right. That's neoliberalism, modernization. On the other hand, there's been a critique from the left of modernization theory as well. So this is around about the same time. This is before neoliberalism came onto the field. People like Paulo Freire and Walter Rodney, there were all a number of other people, Frank Sweezy. There were a lot of other people who were starting to say that this thing of modernization, that's not actually what happens. And what they were saying, and they started to use things like class and imperialism and those kind of words, and the third world people speak about. And so these were often third world theories. And what they were saying is that actually development in the underdeveloped countries like South Africa, Zambia, Kenya, all those countries, even India, and the third world, lots of the theories came out of Latin America, Bolivia, and those countries. What they were saying is that actually development in these countries, it's not that the people are poor, but actually what is happening is the people are oppressed. And development in these underdeveloped countries, people like South Africa, the development is actually blocked. We are not being allowed to move forward. And so they used to speak about things like neo-colonialism, that we were colonized and people actually had colonies here. But now when they moved their colonial regimes out, they still kept control of the economies. Right. So, okay, Anglo-Americans, not maybe a good example, but maybe if you hear the word Anglo and American, Anglo means English, right? There were big companies from overseas that were actually controlling our economies and saying what needs to happen over here. And what they were doing is they were keeping our economies so that we only provided raw minerals, we provided food, we provided cheap labor, but all the big stuff, the stuff that actually makes money, that they control. And they decide what the prices of stuff will be. So they will decide that food should be run cheaply, that is cheap commodities. But computers are expensive commodities. So the stuff that they produce, because they decide what gets paid, the stuff that they produce, that stuff is expensive. The stuff that the poor countries produce, that must be cheap. And they were saying that people were keeping these other economies, they were keeping them down. So if they open up, for example, I'm going to stop using Volkswagen as an example. But if they open up a Volkswagen plant over here, they will insist that we are only opening up the Volkswagen plant in your area because there's cheap labor there. They're not going to open up the, if we decide that we're going to push up the cost of labor, they will move their Volkswagen plant somewhere else. And in that way, they're keeping the economies oppressed. And so they were investing in the country the way the neoliberals were saying that they should do. In fact, the modernization people say we must have investment, foreign investment in the country. And what the dependency theory people were saying, look, the thing about foreign direct investment is, yes, they do put money in the country, but they take out more money than what they put in. So they're actually leaving the country with super profits, because you're not going to invest in the country and not going to profit. So the net flow of money is actually out of the country and not into the country. Right? So that was their problem with development theory. They're saying that actually development theory doesn't look at the people who are benefiting from poverty. That they won't necessarily want workers' wages to be higher because, like the market says, and actually what they're doing is they're trying to keep wages, especially in your poorer country, they're trying to keep those wages as low as possible so that their main country can develop. And that's what they start to speak about imperialism and neocolonialism. So that's the one part. They were saying that the big countries, the imperialist countries, were oppressing the people in the other countries. And the second thing they were saying is that what they were actually doing is that they were using a local elite to run the countries on behalf of these other countries. And this local elite was then handsomely rewarded. So you had dictatorships happening in many countries in the world, especially Latin America and Africa. Dictatorships were developed. They're saying that these dictatorships, these people didn't become dictators for their own benefit. They were actually sponsored by people from outside. And they were running the countries on behalf of these people, and they were being rewarded handsomely. So you had all these tycoons in people like places like Ghana, trying to think of some of the other countries, the Ivory Coast, etc. You have these dictators for life who were living the life, and they had jets and jet skis and yachts and those kind of stuff. But they were actually caretaker governments who were running the governments on other people's behalf. Or they were given control over factories, etc. But they were actually caretakers on other people's behalf. And I don't want to go here because I'm going to step on people's toes, about our own local situation. So they said that the local people were only managing the economy on behalf of other people elsewhere. And that these imperialist economies were getting involved in our economies to keep us oppressed. All right? So your development people, when it comes to the poor, your modernization people will say that the problem is that people are poor. All right? But poverty is not political. Poverty is just there, and we need to eradicate it. The neoliberals will say that the problem is that people are unemployed. So what we need to do is we need to grow business so that more people can become employed, and that way we will eradicate poverty. The dependency theory people are saying people are not poor by accident, people are actually oppressed and they're being kept poor. Right? And most of the dependency theory says that so we need to liberate ourselves from the people who are keeping us poor. So it's a very different route. All right? And they were saying that because people are being kept poor deliberately, modernization is not going to happen because other people are going to block your development. The other problem that there is modernization is they said that modernization was Eurocentric because the Eurocentric development theory wouldn't work for them. And it started to say that people in Europe were like, nearer my God to thee. That's why Europeans were better. But that actually we needed to look at Afrocentric theories, things like decolonization would often come from dependency theory, or Latin America would speak about indigenous solutions or other kinds of solutions. And people started to say under dependency theory, we are our own liberators. And the other problems that they saw is that modernization, neoliberalism, was in denial about colonialism. And I said it's almost as if colonialism didn't happen and that these countries were poor just because of things that they did, because of the internal characteristics. And they ignored the whole issue of inequality. They said, yes, people are poor, but they looked at poverty as being a problem, but they didn't say that some people are poor because other people are rich. They said that we need to make everybody rich. Right? So it's a different way of looking at poverty and how do we eradicate poverty. And they're saying that poverty is being kept in place by certain people. Any comments at this stage? Guys? Are we still all okay?
Yeah, I'm still fine this side, man.
Okay. So it's a lot, eh? But I mean that's kind of where he is, and I'm giving you highlights. You need to read him in a bit more detail.
Yeah.
But this is the highlights of what they're saying. So underdevelopment theory and populism is these are more anti-theories against modernization, and the two modernization, which is neoliberalism and modernization. But just give some of the ideas of dependence, because it's important that you understand dependency theory so you understand where the populists are coming from. So dependency theory would say that there's certain catchphrases that, so they won't speak about undeveloped countries or less developed countries or developing countries. They will speak about underdeveloped countries. They will say that these countries were underdeveloped by somebody. People at the time, people like Malcolm X, he says, we didn't land on Plymouth Mouth, which was Plymouth Mouth Rock. Plymouth Mouth Rock landed on us. Right? So these are the kind of the things that they were saying, is that people were underdeveloped and continue to be underdeveloped by the other countries because of unfair trade relations. That and some of the underdeveloped theories, for example, started to speak about, well, some people started to speak about socialist revolution, that was at the time, but other people started to speak about delinking. And interestingly, people like, I suppose, Thabo Mbeki is probably starting to speak about that to an extent. Gaddafi was starting to speak about that. They started to say, Africa must unite, and it must de-link from this imperialist economy, and we need to look after our own businesses. Right? So we must make sure that we are self-sufficient and that we can look after ourselves. We need to get rid of all the debt. We need to get rid of the controls of foreign capital, and we need to make sure that we look after ourselves, because these people are these other people are, they're just going to drive the food prices up, and they're getting us to compete with each other. Just to give you an example of some of the examples that they were speaking about, coffee. Quite a bit of the coffee is not grown in Latin America, like you'll see on the American TV. Lots of the coffee is grown here in Africa. But what the World Bank did, for example, they went to the one country and said, no, you guys must grow cash crops. Right? Don't look at the other stuff. You need to build your economy, so build cash crops, and they introduced these structural adjustment programs. And so they went to the one country, they said, you know what is selling right now is coffee. Then they would go to another country and say, you know what's selling right now is coffee. And they go to another country, you know what's selling right now is coffee. So all these countries are growing coffee. Then Starbucks will come around and says, oh, but that country is also going, I can get coffee cheaper over there. And then they go to the other country, get coffee cheaper over there. And as a result, all the coffee prices go down, and Africa is growing coffee cheaply. But who's making the money are your shipping companies who's transporting the coffee from Africa to Starbucks in the USA. So they're the people who's making money off coffee. They're the people who's making money off chocolate and that kind of stuff. But for the actual growing of coffee, there's not a lot of money in that. Right? Where you get money is from people selling coffee. Cashew nuts, for example, is very cheap in Mozambique. But if you come to Africa, where the money is actually made, yeah, it's expensive. So the cashew nut growers are not making money. The people who's getting the cashew nuts into our stores, those are the people who's making the money. So it's not Mozambique who's making money from cashew nuts. Right? So those are some of the things that they're saying, no, we need to de-link and we need to eat our cashew nuts ourselves. Basically, that's what they say. We need to grow food for ourselves. We need to become self-sufficient. Now, the impact of the dependency theory has not been very strong because the dependency theorists would argue that actually they've tried to keep it down. But it does have the ideas were in some third world countries. For example, Nyerere in Tanzania was trying to do it. Allende is trying to do it. Manley in Jamaica was trying to do it. Unfortunately, some of the people who pushed for dependency theory got killed. Nyerere survived, but they put his economy under pressure. Even people who, but they did it for the wrong reasons. People like Mugabe, who tried to say we're gonna grow and we're gonna run our own economy. They moved in there and they destroyed your economy. So they found that in practice, it's been very difficult to implement discussion theory because, as the dependency theorists would have said, your bigger countries then got involved and destroyed dependency theory's ability to do anything. So the impact on theory has been quite limited. And in policy discussions, so you're unlikely to see dependency theory happening in our policy discussions, though some people might try to slip it in careful ways, right? How do we begin to build self-dependence? The other problem with dependency theory is that it started to speak about big politics, but when you ask them, but now how are you going to do it? They were kind of weak there. They couldn't tell you how exactly they're going to do this stuff. They tried, for example, in early Zimbabwe, when just as they came out of independence, people like, what were their names again? Chang and Nyanga, I think, wrote it. They came up with concepts like education with production, where they sent people out in the fields and they learned while they were producing and while they were trying to rebuild the country. They were also they were learning agriculture, but in the fields. But they weren't necessarily growing the fields for big businesses. They were trying to grow the fields for themselves. And while they were growing it, they were also learning. Right? And that's how they learned about agriculture. So they had this whole education with production movement. But they didn't necessarily have lots of technical guidance, and after a while that died. Botswana tried the Botswana brigades, so there were different stuff that happened in different areas. Tanzania did a whole lot of marvelous stuff, and then there were the schools that Paulo Freire and them started out in Latin America. It was quite big, right? Where they started to work with small communities, right? So there was a lot of that kind of stuff happening. So, there I do mention Paulo Freire. And so in education specifically, you'll see the ideas of, dependency theories ideas in the writings of Paulo Freire, right? Where Paulo Freire was starting to say, very practically, that dependency theory isn't just a theory, it also has a pedagogy, it has a particular way of training, it has a particular way of teaching, and which he called the pedagogy of the oppressed. Right? And he says that we shouldn't use European education, we should use our own education, and the education needs to fight against the culture of silence amongst the locals. Because what they were saying is that modernization theory said, here is the truth, and we will give it to you from Britain. And what people like Freire was saying, no, we need to be listening to the masses, and the masses will tell us what their truth is, and we will speak our truth to their power. Right? So he started to have a different stuff where he started to say, instead of taking information and banking it in people's heads, we need to listen, and we need to look at the environment and say, how can we use theory in order for people to empower themselves, rather than using theory just so that we can train them, like the neoliberals would say, so that you can train them so they can go work for somebody else. Right? So it's not about people being self-employed, it's about people being independent. And I'll send you a video link of somebody who's still trying that in India, and this model has now gone out to areas in Africa as well. But he's actually more a populist theorist, where they're getting grandmas who don't have any reading and writing. they're teaching them the principles of electricity, and they're building solar panels in villages that that modernization theory haven't reached. So that's the one thing. So there's the idea that in education, these people, they'll be fighting against Europeanization of education. So your decolonization people, they'll be fighting for more against the culture of silence. They'll also be struggling against the comprador bourgeoisie, you know, your local elites. So they will start to say, no, but the state works for the imperialists and big business works for the imperialists. Or this is an imperialist intervention. Don't tell us what to do. We will begin to empower ourselves. So that's a different approach to how do we develop. And they say that the poor needs to liberate themselves as opposed to being liberated from above. Right? It's a different approach. You still need to decide which approach you think has the best chance of doing right by your students. Right? What is the best way forward out of poverty for South Africa? What's the best way forward for the poor? Now, coming to populism, which is where you all wanted to be. All right, so we've looked at neoliberalism, now look at populism. So whereas development theory was starting to say we need to fight against oppression and all that kind of stuff, populism was saying what we need to do is we need to go back to the people. Oppression is going to happen, but what we need to do is we need to find ways to empower ordinary people on the ground. And so they had certain critiques of development theory. They're saying, which is basically modernization. They were saying that all these people are speaking about modernization, but actually, if you look at it on the ground, modernization is not reaching the poorest and the most marginalized. The feminists were saying women specifically were being excluded. In fact, when they started to introduce some of these interventions, it was actually making things worse for the poor people, especially for the women. Right? So the problem is not that women were not being included. The problem is that when they were running these projects like doing dam building projects and these agricultural things, etc., the interventions were just wrong. In fact, there was a version of modernization theory happening in the communist countries where they were bringing in stuff and they were saying, this is how you must plant. And whereas people were having their own little plantations, etc., the communists came in places like China and the place where Pol Pot and them were from, and they started this mass agriculture. And people were dying because this centrally run bureaucracy was just not planting things right. They were planting things too close to each other, and the crops were not working, etc. So rather than using people's indigenous knowledge, they were telling people how to do things, not understanding that people themselves already have ideas. So instead of supporting people to do what they were doing better, they were coming in, they were imposing things from the top down, and it wasn't working. The same thing with lots of your government projects. In Tanzania, Nyerere was forced to go the modernization route. And they came back to him and they said, but now why are things going wrong? And Nyerere told him, you know, before you guys came to me and said I must do things this way, I had 90%, I had wiped out illiteracy amongst 19% of my people. People were fed, etc. Things were going right. And then you told me that I must do things your way. And now things are going wrong. And are you asking me what is going wrong? I should be asking you what is wrong with your plan. Because they were saying that the problem is an implementation issue. The modernization people are saying implementation is the issue. And Nyerere and the feminists and some of the populists are saying it's not an implementation issue. We are implementing the wrong thing. These projects that you're bringing in doesn't work for poor people. It actually excludes poor people. Right? So that is the argument coming from feminists, and it's broader. You can look at whether these plans that are being introduced from the top down, are they working for people on the ground, or is it the wrong plan? Are we doing the wrong thing? Right? That would be the populist argument. The other argument came from the environmentalists. They're saying that this whole idea of economic growth is actually a bad thing, because the more you grow the economy, the more you grow industry, the more you destroy the environment. Right? So we have fracking plants happening out in the Karoo. And it's good for the economy, but it's bad for the environment. And the more you make things that are good for the economy, the more the environment gets destroyed. And the more the environment gets destroyed, the more poor people suffer. Right? So they say that we need to be looking for development that is alternative to what the modernization people are proposing. And then there was another group who was starting to say that actually we must not only decolonize, we must not only get rid of the colonials, we need to decolonize our minds, that these ideas are Eurocentric. They're actually a form of cultural imperialism. So they're letting us forget what it is that we already know. And so some people are starting to look at indigenous knowledge systems and that kind of stuff. And for those of you who are going to do maths, people like Becky Kuzuwayo and he's retired now, Prof. Ogu. I can't get to Prof's surname now. They did a lot of work around Mishego Gunyi. They did lots of work around developing indigenous knowledge systems. Like, how do people traditionally understand maths, and why is that different from the European way of understanding maths? And they're thinking that if we begin to access what we already know, we'd be able to come with alternative ways of doing stuff. The other theory, and this is a bit complex, is that they were saying that there's almost a regime of representation. Now, this is going into a whole other world of postmodernism. They're saying that because people are saying that the only way to do things is we need to meet the needs of industry, and everybody's saying we need to meet the needs of industry, we need to meet the needs of industry. They're saying that that meeting the needs of industry is an ideology, and by repeating this thing often enough, that by repeating a lie often enough, we're starting to think that it's the truth. And we switch our brains off, and we stop looking for other ways of doing stuff. So when people come up with other ideas, they say you're nuts, because this is only one way of doing it. We need to meet the needs of industry. And the populists will say, no, we need to look at other ways of doing stuff, things that are local. And I'm going to be sending you a link. As soon as we're done, I'm going to be sending you a link to a video from Bunker Roy, where in India and in parts of Africa, they started to do things differently. They started to say, how can we do things differently? How do we use our own indigenous knowledge? All right, so just to summarize, what they are saying is that development theory, this top-down one, it's Eurocentric, it's top-down, it damages the environment, and it destroys rural societies. Right? And also, it hasn't worked. But not only hasn't worked, it makes us feel like we are the ones who are failing, not the theory, that we are the ones who are failing, and that all that we've done is we've treated ourselves as being stupid, and the people who are poor, the people who are at the bottom, they remain poor, and importantly, they remain powerless. So you've got the silent majority of poor people. So poor people they are just recipients of welfare. Right? They must open their mouths, they must say hi, and you put in the medicine. They have no idea, they don't have any say in how they think their lives should be made better. Right? So modernization has brought down this culture of business, that the students must just sit down, shut up, and listen. They must get education and they must get a job, but they mustn't say anything. That's how their life must happen. And one of the people, for example, as Costa is working on this, let me just see if I've got this in the next slide, as they're starting to speak about livelihoods, is one of the words that they're starting to say. How do we help people in their own area to develop their own livelihoods? And I've seen some populist grassroots projects happening in some of the areas. I was at one of the colleges, but they're almost doing it on the side. It's one of the colleges, and they were given farms, and they're teaching local people to farm. And they're using the college's resources to do this. My mother used to go to sewing classes, so they taught my mother how to sew. We had a computer class here in our area, interesting, and they were using the money, and this is interesting. So they were using money that came out of a neoliberal ideology from the CETAs, and local people here organized, and they brought the CETAs, and there's two colleges. We have a college here and a college here, but they brought the third college. Actually, I'm going to tell you the names. So I've got Northland College here on the one side and College of Cape Town here on the other side. But Boland College were offering at the school, they were offering computer classes for people who couldn't read, or they could barely read or write. And obviously have to be able to do a little bit of reading. But they were offering it for aunties and uncles in the community so that they could teach people how computers work. Right? So they can then do little things in the area. But it's just basically an empowerment course, and the CETA was paying for it. And the CETA was paying for it. The local people organized it, and they brought people into the class, and it was being offered by a college at the local school or at the local church. Right? So they were bringing together neoliberal ideas and populist ideas and making the two of them kind of work together. But you will see people will use words like the masses. So they won't speak about the unemployed, because unemployed don't necessarily have a voice. The poor don't have a voice, whereas the masses is an active thing. They are involved in their own, in developing their own livelihoods. They will speak about maybe the people, but they will speak about grassroots. This is a grassroots initiative. There's things that people did for themselves. My wife, who I'm very proud of, for example, they started a shelter for it started out of being for abused women, and then that shelter started to grow, and they started to do all kinds of other things besides working with children. They started to offer advice, etc. And this whole thing was run only by volunteers. It's aunties and uncles who, most of them hadn't completed the matric. But they, for example, they were going around to schools, and what had happened at this particular at one of the schools in the poorest areas is they said, now can't you teach people about dealing with abuse and stuff? And they said, no, but we can't because our curriculum is too full. So the curriculum wasn't dealing with things that people face every day. The curriculum was teaching people how to pass subjects. But they said, but that child, these children all have problems at home, but we can't deal with it because we're so busy teaching our curriculum. So these aunties and uncles, they would then take these children. For example, this one child is being raped by a police officer over the way. And the police wouldn't arrest him because he's one of their friends. And so she was just disappearing. And so these aunties and uncles, they would take the child, and they went to the child to the police station, make sure that the police record the case, make sure that this guy gets arrested. They took the child to the hospital, make sure the child has services. They took the child to rape crisis. They took the child to court. They sat with the child in court every day, and they made sure that the case went through. That child then got involved, by the way, and she started to do this for other children. And after a while, they had a group of about 80 students, where the students said they all signed a pact. Sorry, I get caught up whenever. They all signed a pact where they all promised each other that they will help each other whenever they're feeling down, because lots of the children were suffering some form of abuse or another, where they promised them that they would help each other and that they all complete matric, and they started a buddy up system. They then, after a while, these group of students, they went up the West Coast, and they had plays so that other children could see that this is not happening to them alone. And then these children would come forward, and all of these were aunties and uncles. They managed to get a bit of state funding, but your big organizations who were getting state funding were just telling people, look, we will provide shelter for you. What is different about this is that here the people themselves were running the shelter themselves, right? And they were doing it on a volunteer basis, and they had full-time volunteers. People who were sitting at home were coming in, and they were helping each other, and they were helping the little children out, and they were helping other adults, and they started to help people with like when they've been like maybe somebody there with legal problems and that kind of stuff, or somebody died and they had to form a funeral fund. But these were all things that the community themselves began to organize, but it was a self-help project. And the state wasn't telling them what to do. It wasn't from outside, it came from it was an initiative from below. So those are kind of more the impact. The weakness, however, of the popular stuff is that often these are small-scale local projects, and where's the money going to come from? All right. So it's good people get involved, etc. But where's the money going to come from? All right. And so even this project I'm speaking about, they had to at some stages seek outside funding, and sometimes the problem with outside funding is they don't know what to do, so they have to tell the outside funding to go fly a kite, and they had to use the institutions that exist, the courts that modernization created, like the courts and the schools, etc. They use that infrastructure in order to develop their own local projects. In fact, I think at one stage they even used the local college to see if they could use the local college to train people who needed certain training. All right. So part of the weakness of that is that poor people running poor people's projects, they don't necessarily have the infrastructure and the resources, and they needed lots of outside support. Places like Rape Crisis, etc., those kind of community organizations helped them out quite a bit, right, in order to do resources. But those resources don't necessarily exist inside of the community. So that's part of the difficulty with small-scale projects. And the question that you're asking in your essay is, to what extent are there populist projects, and to what extent can colleges support populist projects or populist ideas at the college? And how do the populists see this new vocationalism? When the new vocationalism happens in your college, if you were a populist, how do you view this? Right? So what has the impact been of populism? One, they've influenced grassroots education programs. So we had lots of programs happening at night after school, etc. There are lots of grassroots education programs happening, probably even in our community. In fact, some colleges even have, I don't know if any of you have community projects. Do any of you have community projects?
No.
At your college? You know what some colleges have done? I know one student here, when we were offering the undergrad course, is she brought the in a course. They would go out and they had to identify communities there in those community projects, and they get marked on those community projects. So they had to go out and they had to evaluate certain stuff, maybe out and look at the local bed and breakfast, etc. Evaluate the bed and breakfast and say, now, how can they improve, and then bring it back to the class. And so they were using real life examples from the community. They were using it in their classes. Another student, what he did is he said they're going to use the college's resources and they're going to fix the local school. So they did plumbing. So this is a plumbing class. So they went into the local school and the students went to go work on the taps there. And they had a relationship between the plumbing students and the local school to fix the taps. So the students were getting experience and taps were being fixed. And these were students who were from the local area, so they understood what the problems are. Another student, I'm trying to think of another, they do hairdressing, where they cut old people's hair and what have you, and they give them pamper makeovers, etc. But there's people, as children from the community, coming and say, how can I use my skills to benefit my community, and how can I use my skills to train other people? So they were showing people how to apply the makeup, etc. And it wasn't for employment, it was about community empowerment. So people were using the skills in order to support local projects, and they were using the college's resources. Part of the difficulty there was that the college said, but how do we timetable this? And people were saying, no, the problem's not the timetable. You must make the timetable work for the people. The people mustn't work for the timetable. The timetable must work for the people. And say, but where does it come in the budget? Those students, I know the one who was doing community projects, she was saying, but my students are doing better than anybody else. You can't afford not to do this, because my students are gaining valuable experience. They're not getting work integrated learning, but they are getting community integrated learning. And they're getting experience that way. So how do we build this into our timetable? So what are the opportunities that exist at the college to use some of the populist ideas in conjunction with the neoliberal ideas So that colleges are doing useful stuff. At some stage, I know that Keith Loynes, do you guys get the College Times? There's this magazine coming, the College Times. Sometimes you'll see in there are little community projects that people are doing. All right. But that's kind of the populist ideology where they're starting to say self-empowerment, people, the people must kind of, they must look after themselves because if they don't do it, nobody's else going to do it. So you're starting with the people. So just in short, the neoliberals are saying we need to let the market into education. And if we let the market into education, we'll be able to afford education, and people will have better choices as to what education they can get. Right? We must take education out of the hands of the bureaucracy. Your populists are saying that education must serve the needs of the people, and the people themselves need to decide what kind of education they need. And that the top-down, the education that we are giving them is not necessarily the education that they need, and so we need to tailor education to serve the needs of the people themselves. Right? So those are kind of your two poles. What you are thinking about in the project is, to what extent are either of those ideas circulating in your college? Because in your college, there will be neoliberal, there are people who have neoliberal ideas, and there are people who have populist ideas about what education should do. What are they doing at the college? Which theory, which set of ideas is dominant in your college? And is it in fact working? Is it helping poor people to develop? Right? Should we be getting people jobs? Should we be building people's livelihoods? How should we respond to the new vocation? Is the new vocationalism a good idea? Is the neoliberal idea? Is it the populist idea? Or can we have a mixture of the two where they work together? Sure. So guys, that's a lot. So I don't worry about political economy too much. So in short, modernization says that the way development happens is that we must all try to be like Europe, and that the state should be involved, right, especially in education. Liberalism said that business must lead, and we need to run colleges like businesses. And the development says that people are actually being oppressed, both by international and local big business, and that we need to develop self-reliance. We need to de-link from those bodies. The populists are saying modernization works for some people, but not for others. It's not widespread enough. It hasn't gone. It's not reaching all the people, and so the people themselves need to develop responses, and education should assist them. And don't worry too much about globalization. Right? So that in a nutshell is what the different theories are. So that's a very long reading. Oops. So that's a very long reading, and you will see there's a summary here of some of the main ideas. And that's it. That's development theory. Sorry, guys, that was a very long session.
It was long and very nice for my side because uh, I was my mind was opened up now, no? Because I didn't go through all those theories that you sent to us, but now I could see now I can know that okay, for my side, not only call it like they run it like a business, no? So I know that they fall under that neoliberalism, no? So they fall under
Yeah.
that from my side because what they do, they want profits all the time.
And lots of people are saying that we do have a neoliberal. Sorry, Björn, you were saying?
So they want profits. Also, they run it like a business, and they feel like they need to have profit, especially when we're doing the part-time classes, no? Even if you have a certain number of students. But what they tell you is we need to have at least 30% profit from the number of students that are going to register. So we need profit. If there's no profit, we can't open up a class, because now what they're counting is that the electricity, water, and all of the other standards that they need to take care of. Yeah.
That's all you were saying?
No, I didn't say anything because I was just receiving a phone call, but I had to switch off my mic. So,
Oh, okay.
what was the question? I didn't
No,
get
no,
it.
no, it's fine. I'm just asking if there are any general comments, because that's kind of been our experience as well. And so different. Some people are still in the modernization. They're saying, no, the state must just pay. And they're saying, and we're going to have a certain number of students, and the state must pay. Other colleges are becoming more entrepreneurial. But the challenge would be is that from a development perspective, is this helping the poor, or is this the college serving itself? Are we contributing to development? In So some of the neoliberals would say, but you've got to give a balanced argument. But it's exactly that you're saying now, Vianney. I mean, you're on the right track. So you'll be saying that at our colleges, this is what's happening. We're saying that we're looking at how much profit. In fact, when this one lecturer wanted to implement the STEP project, where's the budget for that? And how's it fit in the timetable? So because people's welfare didn't fit into the timetable and didn't fit into the modernization agenda, people said, therefore, it's not going to work. Whereas the populists say, but no, it only works if it works for the people, So those are kind of the debates. And at the colleges, you will have populists who are starting to say, no, but we must. And some people will actually run with little projects, like this one lecturer that I was speaking about. I'm not going to mention their names. And they will try to run these little projects because they believe that, the college should benefit people, like this computer project we had over here. We even had some skills training projects at the local college, my wife and them. And then these were all people working for free, eh? So the local college offered some free courses to them, some and teach them after hours. So there are spaces within the college, and this is where the political economy people say, they say you can't wish, this is the big, they say you can't wish modernization away. It is going to be there. But can you make use of modernization to support popular initiatives? And so they're trying to look at ways of doing that. I'm a big fan of my wife, at doing that kind of thing. So how she take from the rich and give to the poor kind of stuff. All right, but that's where the different theories are. How does your theory think that we should now, if we're going to do the new vocationalism, do the pop think that we should be going the new vocational route? Or do the populists think that we should be doing something else? And if we do go the new vocational route, where you're focusing on workplace and work skills, etc., how will the neoliberals go about doing it? And what has been the effect of that? Is it working? Is it making things better for the poor, whatever you want to call them, the unemployed, the oppressed, the masses? And do the populists, how do the populists think? What do they think? Should we be doing modernization? But the thing is that the populists can't wish modernization away. What do the populists think should be happening? How should we respond to socialism? What kind of responses should we be implementing? And that's kind of where your essay is going. So you're discussing the new vocationalism, then you're saying this has been the neoliberal response. This is what my college, in your case, Vuyani, has had a predominantly neoliberal response. And this has been the result. Right? Working or it's not working. These are the advantages of what they're doing, these are disadvantages. A populist, if we had to do a populist response, this is how we could have responded to the new vocationalism. And it may or may not have had a different result. Or this is how we are responding. There are populist initiatives at our college. This is what has happened. It's either been choked or it's been supported, and it's working or it's not working. Right. So that's kind of where your essay is at. Okay with that. Well, that was a marathon session.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, guys.
Okay, then.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm on the other end of the line. Just send me a WhatsApp. My
Okay.
son has got unlimited calls. We call it his nanny phone. My wife bought him something so that he's got unlimited calls, so I can call you back. So we just have to take time away from him and his girlfriend. They're on the phone the whole time because now with COVID, they're on the phone the whole time.
Okay.
I'm still speaking to Nani again. Okay, but you can just WhatsApp me or give me a call, and or we can do this kind of face-to-face thing. Yeah, I can WhatsApp call you as well.
Okay. So,
Okay,
Okay, then.
thanks.
okay. Thank you. Enjoy your weekend.
Send me
Bye.
stuff. Yeah, thanks, guys. Send me stuff if you want. If you want me to just have a look at it, even if you're busy, you don't have to give me the completed project, and I will give you
Okay.
feedback. Okay, I already gave that offer to Lazola. Okay,
Okay, I'll do so.
thanks, guys.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay,
then.
you keep well. Bye.
Bye.
So.
Wait.